Hi, I'm Shauna Lake, founder and principal consultant of Deepen Talent Strategies. And I often asked, do I need a handbook? How often should I update my handbook? And then usually at the start of each calendar year, I'm asked, were there any major law changes I should know about? So I thought this might be a nice topic to say, what are some of the key elements of your employee handbook? Are there some things that are maybe a little outdated that you should think about revisiting or even just taking out? So let's dive into this topic of, do I need a handbook refresh? And so here are some of the key elements of most handbooks: a welcome, your mission, vision, values, an employment at will statement, your equal employment opportunity statement, often with a commitment to diversity. We love to see those statements to the extent they're true. Please don't say anything that you don't fully believe in your handbook. Conflicts of interest, employment relationship, and what are the key elements of that? And I'll show that on the next slide. What are your key policies and your guidelines? Workplace safety, which takes on lots of different flavors depending on your business and your industry. Compensation and benefits, and then the key acknowledgement, getting that signature, which in so many HRIS systems today isn't done on paper. It's done electronically and often even in the onboarding process. And if you don't have a payroll system or an HRIS system that's doing that electronically, talk to us about free and low cost ways to do that and make your life a little bit easier. The key employment relationship key elements are defining exempt versus non-exempt. Who is eligible for overtime in your organization? And also part-time versus full-time. How many hours a week does someone need to be scheduled on a regular basis to be defined as full-time? And that can vary greatly, and you get to decide. There is often a tie between what benefits someone is eligible for. So you will want to cross-reference with your plan documents if you offer health insurance and retirement plan. Make sure that you're being consistent between those documents if you're going to update or write a handbook from scratch. Again, overtime and how that is defined is in this section. For most states and most organizations, that's any hours worked over 40 in a work week. It cannot be balanced out between a pay period. I do get that question a lot, but it is important to know in some states, especially in California, that can be time over 8 hours in a work day. And then in this section, we also list the legal reasons why you can deduct a salaried person, someone who's exempt from overtime, how you can deduct their pay. So someone who's exempt and paid salary is paid their full weekly pay no matter how many hours they work. They can be on vacation and you ask them to log into their email. Technically, you're paying them for that whole week, even if they're out of PTO time. But there are some reasons why you can legally deduct their salary, and we specify those in the handbook. How are they paid? The paycheck cycle, frequency, and we want to clearly define the work week because, again, this is going to determine how we calculate overtime. So I get very specific. It could be 12:01 a.m. Monday through midnight Sunday, and we want to put that in this section. And then also access to personnel files. How often can somebody ask for a copy of their personnel file? How do they ask? Who do they ask? And make sure you know your state laws. Then we get into those key policies and guidelines, and I don't need to go through all of these here. You can see the list on the screen. It's just important to know what are the things that are common, but also anything that's unique to your business that you want to make sure we don't have any unclear expectations. And there might be some things that are pain points. If you find yourself having to have common conversations, some things that are frequent areas of performance gaps, disciplinary conversations, perhaps it's time to add something to the handbook about that. And we get into compensation and benefits. Sometimes we include how do we do performance reviews, on what frequency, and when and how do we consider merit increases? Now, you don't have to put this in your handbook. And if you don't want to lock yourself into something, leave it out. It's totally fine. If you want people to know and you are going to follow it, then you can put it in the handbook. And this is where we would include our time off policies and how do we request that, in what increments, who's eligible, This is where we list our holidays and again, who's eligible. If you have to be present the day before and the day after a holiday, you want to make sure that's clear. Any leaves of absences that you have, you'll want to list that here. And I'll note that we're seeing a trend to have parental leave, not just maternity leave, but also paternity leave, or just blending it to be parental leave. And we have written so many different variations of those policies. I'm happy to have a conversation about that. We also include military leave here, bereavement leave, and be aware of your state laws, especially if you have employees in the state of Illinois. They have some of the most progressive laws on bereavement leave, and also covers pregnancy loss. Jury duty, time off for voting, any group benefits that you have would be included here, retirement plan, workers' compensation, and any other benefits. And then some outgoing practices that, this is my personal opinion, and you want to please be consistent with any collective bargaining agreements that you have, as well as any operating agreements. But any overly prescriptive disciplinary processes, I would recommend getting rid of those and giving yourself more leeway. If someone isn't performing well, not meeting expectations, and isn't a good fit, instead of taking a lot of time and emotional energy to paper up a termination, let's just move them out of the organization. If you believe it's high risk, obviously consult legal counsel, consult your HR partners. Perhaps it's a good idea to do a severance agreement with a release of claims. That's probably worth, your time is probably more valuable than that severance expense. And you aren't locking yourself into following specific steps. That is becoming more common in the handbooks that we write today. But again, you definitely need to consult partners that you have. I also would recommend revisiting any open door policies that you have. I definitely want you to be open-minded and accessible to your team members. And you want to have a complaint procedure, because if someone has a valid concern, especially about harassment or discrimination, they need a vehicle to report that, and those should be taken seriously and investigated immediately. If you haven't read Cy Wakeman's No Ego book, I highly recommend it, though. It will change your opinion on open door policies. In her book, she describes how having an open door policy where people can come in and spend a lot of your time just kind of griping about the things that bug them isn't the best use of anyone's time. The people who tend to take advantage of those open door policies tend to be our lower performers, our lower potential employees. The people who aren't taking up all of your time are the people that are working hard to creating better outcomes for your customers or your patients or whomever you're serving. And so rethinking those open door policies might be something to consider. And again, I highly recommend the book No Ego. Having employees sign over their jury duty pay is something you can do in most states, but considered outdated. Having a probationary period longer than 90 days is also something that I think is an outdated practice. And to have a probationary period at all for salaried employees, my personal opinion, sends a message that you aren't confident in your hiring decision. So again, just my personal opinion. Having a dress code policy and one about piercings and tattoos may also be something that could be working against you. And here's why. I think your clients, the people you're serving, want to see people who look like them. So think about that. Who are you serving? Who are your vendors, your clients, the people that your team members are interacting with? And do you have policies that are actually maybe intimidating to them, that are having your team members look different than them? That might be something to reevaluate. Policies that forbid the use of personal use of phones and company equipment used to be incredibly common, and most people still have them today. However, a lot of our workforce doesn't have a cell phone or a computer that isn't provided by their employer. And I know you might have a policy against it, but it's just the reality. More people are living paycheck to paycheck. They have high student loan debt, and they can't afford to have another computer. So they may have another phone, but not another computer. If they're not doing something inappropriate, they're just checking Gmail and paying their bills online, do we really care? If you're spending your time monitoring and disciplining people for doing something that's not inappropriate, it's just violating a policy, is that policy really adding value? Just something to consider. And again, just policies that don't allow adults to be adults may not be the best use of your time and resources to police. So just taking a fresh look at some of those could be worth it, to just consider, does this really matter? Is it really worth our time to monitor these policies? If you allow people to have some more flexibility and treat them like adults, they generally will meet your expectations. And then some things that I see that get missed in handbooks: not addressing on-camera attire and the backgrounds that people are having, whether it's their real background or a virtual background, is something we really need to think about in this common age, because it could be representing your business and your brand to clients or vendors, but also new employees. And so you want to make sure that they're setting the right example and having the right representation of your brand. So it's important to really think about that. It's not something that we historically have had policies about. And we have had anti-smoking policies or designated smoking policies for almost decades now, but vaping isn't something that we have specified. So whether you care or not, you need to decide and include that in your policies. And then make sure that your time off policies make it very clear what are the increments of time that people can take. And then again, for your part-time employees and your interns, if they're eligible for holidays or not, or partial, or maybe the ones that only fall on the days they work, it's important to be clear and specify that in the handbook. And then if employees have had holidays off in one calendar year, or if a certain number of paid time off days in one calendar year, there is a general expectation they're going to have those in the next year. And I have had some leaders come to me, or business owners come to me, and feel surprised and upset that people have the sense of entitlement that they're going to have those benefits in the next year. But I think that's human nature. Most of us don't expect to have less paid time off from year to year. There's an expectation, actually the opposite, that if I've been with you more time and I have more tenure, I'll actually have more time off and be rewarded for that service. So if you plan on having fewer days awarded to someone in the next year, it's important to communicate that clearly and as early as you can. I often see people putting FMLA policies in their handbook when it doesn't apply to them. So FMLA applies to organizations that have 50 or more full-time equivalent employees in a 75-mile radius. You might decide to allow someone to have up to 12 weeks of unpaid time, or maybe even pay a portion of that time if they have an illness or they have a child or adopt a child, etc. But having the language of FMLA might be introducing some compliance obligations that don't actually apply to you. So you can have a leave of absence policy or a paternity leave policy or a parental leave policy, but I wouldn't have an FMLA policy unless you actually are subject to FMLA. Sometimes people just borrow somebody else's handbook, or they download one off the internet and don't realize that they may not be subject to FMLA. On the flip side, in 2024, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act came into law, which applies to all private employers with one employee or more. And so that does need to be in your handbook. If you have an ADA policy, an Americans with Disabilities Act policy that talks about how you would accommodate that or consider requests for ADA, which you should have if you have 15 or more employees, I have written just extensions of that to add the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. But if you don't have an ADA policy, because that doesn't apply to you, you probably should add a Pregnant Workers Fairness Act policy. You could have them separate even if you have an ADA policy, but in either case, I would highly recommend adding a Pregnant Workers Fairness Act policy to your handbook. And then just kind of concluding, to have a handbook that doesn't represent your culture, I think, is a missed opportunity. When people have gone from one job to another, they expect to have a lot of these common elements in the handbook. They can be pleasantly surprised, though, if this handbook takes on a different tone and it maybe feels more friendly and inviting and lets them know that they've made a great decision to join your organization, and that this has this is exciting, and that it's not just a list of things they shouldn't do, but it has a more inviting tone, and it has a nice welcome letter from your owner or your CEO, and it is very clear and ties back to your values and your mission. So taking not taking that opportunity to represent your culture, I think, is a missed opportunity. So I hope this has been helpful. If there's anything that I can do to answer questions about your handbook or review your handbook, I'm happy to do that. If you would like some additional resources about employment law and to further educate yourself, we have a library in h2l.live of actually thousands of courses, but for HR professionals or someone who would like to become certified or get recertification credit, we have 180 pre-certified credits with SHRM and HRCI for recertification credit. So feel free to learn more and even see some sample courses at h2l.live, and connect with us on social media as a company or me personally. And we'd be happy to share more information about anything that we do about those online courses. And if you have any other questions that we could answer to help all of us further our body of knowledge in the world of human resources, please let us know. You can always reach us generally at info@deepenstrategies.com. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.